Okay, well, thank you everybody for joining me this morning for our Lesson 6 Q&A meeting. We're going to be taking a look at obviously the OSU PDC Pro lesson number 6, where we're looking at soil, and we're going to be going through that assignment. It is, I'm happy to say, and I'm sure that you have seen this already, but lesson 6 is a much easier assignment than lesson 5. So it's nice that we're starting the second half here a little bit on an easier note. So yeah, good morning to you, Christopher. Great to have you here. Let me just, what I'm going to do, I will, just before we get going on our, just before we get started here, I'm just going to put the Q&A document in the chat here. Just got to find the link. There we go. Yeah, and if anybody has any questions and they want to drop that into the chat, it is helpful because with this document, you know, there is probably no doubt that there are other people on the call or that will view the video later that may have the same questions. So, all right, so let's get going. We will just share screen here. There we are. So we are at lesson 6, and congratulations to all of you for getting through lesson 5. And it was really impressive to see all of your work, and it is really difficult just getting used to that whole micro watershed concept and applying it in to your project site. So now that that's beyond us, let us take a look at lesson 6 here. So as you can see, we've got 3 different parts to the assignment. We have the soil mapping, we have the actual jar test, and we also have a narrative and analysis where we're going to compare the mapping to the jar test results. So pretty straightforward stuff here. Let us take a look at the mapping. So with the mapping, if you are in the US, which I believe most of this class is, not all of them, you will be using the USDA Web Soil Survey Map. And what I'll do, I'll just quickly go through how to use that because it can be a little bit confusing. There is a tutorial right here that you can go through. But we'll just have a quick peek here. So what I have done is brought up that page. So this is where the link will send you. And first thing you're going to want to do is hit the start button. Now I have already, see, that's probably, I've got a little bit ahead of myself. I'm going to cancel this out. Try again. Nope. Oh, well. So what I did was I took the first person I could see. It was Brooke. I took her project site address and I put that into the area of interest. So the first place you're going to start when you push that button is you're going to have to give it some parameters, right? So let's close that. There we go. We'll see if that helped. Nope. Okay. Well, we'll go through this again. Looks like it's going to let me. So you just basically you put your address in and it will give you this sort of Google Earth image view. And you can see that our project site's right here in the middle. And then we just have to define an area of interest. And the easiest thing to do is just to draw a rectangle And it could be any size. We're just going to make it this size right now. It's often interesting to go outside the project site boundary a little bit. Maybe not really that important when we're getting into urban areas like this, but that's what we've done here nonetheless. So once we have that area of interest, we can then go to the soil map tab here, and it's going to take that area of interest and it's going to tell us what's going on within it. So if we zoom in here, let's see if I can do that. Not quite the view I want. You can see these various soil types. Okay, so we are at 3056, so that's this right here. And we can click on that for some additional information. And this is the info we're going to have you copy and paste into your assignment. And here is the really valuable info, is this gravelly sandy loam. And this is very typical for urban areas. More often than not, I see sandy loam within urban spaces, probably because of the huge disruption that is caused during the subdivision process. But so that is basically how you're going to grab the information from the map here. Now there are some, you can go much deeper with this website, but we're just not going to do that at the moment. So you can please take your time and explore all the various things that this has to offer. But let's go back. And sorry, we're just going to bring up that template file. There we go. So you can see right here on that first page, we want a screenshot. So if we went back here and took a screenshot of this image, that would be great. And then, of course, we want this data that you can basically just copy and paste that info that you saw. And so that is a pretty straightforward part of the survey here, the assignment. And then the next part we have is the soil testing. And again, we have a couple of different tutorial videos here that you can take a look at, but you want to get yourself a mason jar or a honey jar or something, that's a liter or a quart is a good size to use, and sort of half full, fill it, or at least by a third, and then shake it up. And then we are going to look at how all these components separate themselves within the jar test. So we're looking at the soil triangle, which is going to be right here, soil texture triangle, and we're going to locate where your jar test falls. So we've got sand, silt, and clay, and all of the various percentages and how they triangulate themselves. So with the last with this site here that we were looking at and that information, it's saying that it's sandy loam. So if it was as we expect, it would fall somewhere into this area right here. So a lot of sand and not so much on the clay side. So that gives you a little bit of an idea. The jar test, the trickiest part of this that I have found is actually taking a really good photograph of it. That is not an easy thing to do. You need a little bit of additional light or be outside on a sunny day in order to see these various layers that get formed. And they are quite obvious. So when you've gone through this, it should be pretty obvious to you how this all looks. So we have clay. You can see the clay right at the top here. It is very slow to settle. And in this case, this may take about a week. So if you're on heavier soils, expect your jar test to, take a little bit of time to give you the results that you're after here. So again, we have that jar test, and then we have a percolation test. Now, for a number of reasons, this is a really good exercise to go through. It's the simplest way to look for the percolation test is going to tell us a lot, including compaction. So you may have a sandy, let's say you have a sandy loam soil texture that has quite a bit of, it naturally has a high level of percolation. But if for some reason you're not getting a high level of percolation in your test here, it could mean that your soils are on the compacted side. And that's really good to know. Let me just show you here. One of the things that you can use to test this is a penetrometer. We have one that's very similar to this. I think it's a Dickie John. I'm pretty sure. But basically all you do here, if you have this instrument, is it's basically a rod with a handle and a gauge on it, and you just push it into the ground. And the more resistance the ground has, the higher this gauge goes up, and it can show you whether your soils are compacted or at what stage of compaction they're at. We have one of these instruments we use regularly on project sites, and we have found that in most urban areas, you're going to have compaction of some level. And I think a lot of this has to do with the huge disruption that occurs in an urban area. And even if it's an older area, and that compaction was created during when the house was built, it it takes a long, long time for that to be alleviated. So you may discover things, many, many years later that still haven't relieved themselves yet. And I've seen that myself on a project on a new home. It was built, well, I guess about 12 years prior, and the soil around the site was very, very compacted. So we were able to come in and fix that up, and it makes a world of difference. So that is of interest there for you. Yeah, so the percolation test's pretty easy. You're really just going to dig a hole that's generally a spade or shovel blade length deep. So that's usually 12 inches and 12 inches wide, and fill it with water and test and just observe how quickly that it will drain off. And that is an important element to do if you can. So again, there are some tutorials on this part of the discussion board, and they're definitely worth checking out. And then we have the soil narrative analysis. So a little bit about how your soils compared with the soil maps themselves, and then we start thinking about how we can improve our project site soils and what sort of materials are available to us. That's a biggie. And how we might go about that, and what our plans are in terms of updating that. So let's just take a look at a few of the template files here. So got test number 2 and 3, and then we go to our local resources, and then this is a great spot to focus on some of the limiting factors. So you may discover that you have. Let's say you had heavy clay soils. You could, you could say that's a limiting factor. There are a lot of ways of making clay textures lighter, and I think those are obvious. The big thing is compost and organic matter. So there's a few notes to put in here, what some of those nitrogen-rich elements might be for compost, and same with carbon and some other resources, and then some of the goals you have to build soil on your project site. And this is huge because it's one piece that often gets overlooked, especially in traditional landscapes. Landscape design or landscape installations, people often just feel that the soils are almost an inert part of the whole picture, and they are what's driving everything. So everything that's living, anyways. So they are very important, and that I was very lucky in early part of my career. I had as an apprentice, I worked with some tradespeople that were very dialed into their soils. So again, I was lucky. I had some good mentors with that. We've got a SWOT analysis, and then any questions or feedback that you might have. So it is a pretty easy lesson in comparison, and but maybe easy, but it is going to be very valuable and full of info. So one of the things I did also want to point out to you is if we look at this whole map and testing, we're really focused on these particles, right? There's no mention of organic matter here or anything else. So that's because in basically in the soil world, there are really two different camps of sorts. And the one is the traditional soil tests, and these are very valuable. It's very valuable to know where your project site sits on this triangle. It makes your life going forward much easier. An example of this would be, let's say you have clay loam or clay soils and you want to put a rain garden in. If you've got these heavy clay soils and you try and place a rain garden in the landscape, it will probably basically be a pond. It's not going to have the same level of infiltration that, say, a sandy loam would. I know we have sandy loam where I live, and we literally pour water onto the soil and it basically just disappears. It's very, very rare to see any puddling on our property except where there's compaction. But one of the things I want to point out to everybody with regards to that is what's called the soil food web. And let's just take a look at the web itself. So this is something that Dr. Elaine Ingham was, I don't know if she was the prime curator of this whole concept or she worked with a group that put this together, but it again, years and years ago, soil was looked at as an inert material, but it was later discovered that it is just completely full of life. And a lot of that life we cannot see through our naked eye. We have to look at through a microscope. And over, the previous few decades, there's been a lot of work in that field. So let me just go back here. I took courses that Dr. Elaine Ingham offered years ago. I was going to become a soil food web consultant, and at the last minute, I decided I didn't want to do that. Well, at the last minute, at the end of the course, and basically because I didn't want to head down this path as my sole focus, right? So I could see it being quite difficult to have as part of a larger, I love design, I love education, I love soils, but it would be really hard to do the soil food web consultancy part-time. At least that's what I felt. So if you have a chance, check out some of Elaine Ingham's work here. And she's got a huge amount of free videos to watch. The courses are very interesting. If you go back here and even okay, if we search for Dr. Elaine Ingham and we go to videos, I mean, on YouTube, there are so many videos that she has been a part of. They're absolutely free. So I encourage you to dive into that. If you're interested in composting, have a watch about some of her composting videos. They are very different than what you might think. So yeah, this is a great resource, and it really is part of this whole big picture. But it is such a big rabbit hole that adding it into lesson 6 here is, it would be extremely difficult to do. So I know the courses I took, I think I did 3 or 4 courses, and it was quite a long haul, but it was life-changing. I thought I had a pretty good soil background, and a lot of what I learned there was new to me, and which is great. Great to learn new things. So that gives you a little bit of an overall in regards to soils. And I don't know if anybody has any questions at all. I see we have a question in the document here that's not related to soils, but we will take a look at that. So if anybody has a question today on what I've reviewed, please just pop it in the chat there. And otherwise, I will, yeah, hi, Dennis. Good to see you here. Let's take a look at Brooke's question. It's a little, it's off topic, but that's okay. We're going to have a little extra time today. So I don't mind answering any questions that folks have. Yeah, let's see what Brooke has to say here. So she has a client that has people sitting on her retaining wall doing drugs and leaving paraphernalia. That's not good. Now, she doesn't want to wait till the end of the course to plant a hedgerow. All right. The recommendations for full sun, a tree or a hedge that can tolerate narrow width planting space. That is a tall order for sure. 2 feet between the sidewalk and the retaining wall. Well, you know, I wouldn't put, I don't know if Brooke's on the call. Are you here, Brooke? Let's just see if she's here. I don't see her. Yeah. Yeah, in this situation, I don't think that I would be putting any trees here. Well, because for my wife and myself, when we are designing and creating new planting areas, one of the things that we try and do is to, we have minimum bed width sizes we'd like to adhere to. And the minimum width for us would be 4 foot for a number of different reasons. But, you do want to provide a healthy root zone, especially for trees, because when you look at a tree, the top of a tree, you want to envision that it's going to have an equal or greater root zone. So if you look at a Douglas fir and how large they can get, that below ground it's going to have a similar mass. Now it's not going to be a similar proportion, so it's not going to have the same depth and width, but the mass itself. So It's obviously a very important part of tree health. And I would say that this space here, especially with a retaining wall in place and sidewalk, so you have super compaction here to put in a sidewalk. They have gravel and compacted that and then poured the concrete. And then when they build a retaining wall, they put in a footing. So there's a lot of challenges here. What I might suggest is in this space, you could grow some shrub material. You'd have to be really careful what, yeah, Thuya occidentalis is a very narrow cedar, and I've seen it used quite a bit. Um, where I live. Trouble is, where I am, the deer can damage it quite badly. It's very slow growing, very slow to respond. And I'm not sure I would recommend it for that width here. I think just sort of a small shrub would prevent people from sitting on there. That's something you could we can revisit this as we get a little further on in the course, Brooke, but Thuya occidentalis, yeah, it's going to be a tree again, so it's just slower. So yeah, I would be I'd be a little bit hesitant with that. Um, you may even want to do something like the city parks would do, where you put something like berberis in here, so nobody would dare go and sit beside it because they'd get impaled. So that is one idea. So we have a question here in that chat from Dennis. Thank you for that, Dennis. On your PERT test, all my test holes were emptied within 30 minutes. The instruction video waited an hour to check the hole. How do I calculate flow rate? Okay. Well, you could, if you're, um, I guess a question for you, Dennis, was your hole 12 inches deep approximately? Maybe you can either unmute yourself or answer in the chat there. Yes, okay. So if you're 12 inches deep and 30 minutes, you could say you get a 2 foot infiltration per hour. You can kind of divide that up any way you feel like you want to do it. You can just say that your test hole was emptied in 30 minutes or less. When we conducted this sort of test where I live, I think it emptied in 6 minutes. So 30 minutes, that's not too bad, actually, as far as water retention goes. So I hope that helps you out, Dennis. Let me know if not. Okay. Bougainvillea. Yeah, well, Bougainvillea, my experience with that is it's subtropical. It may You may be able to get it through some winters outdoors, but it's primarily, a conservatory type plant in this part of the world, although it is very vigorous. Something like that might work really well. It all depends if they're trying to discourage people from sitting on that little wall. You do have to be mindful about what you put there. A climber may not really deter people. So something more dense and even spiny might be good. Christopher had some suggestions here. Euonymus, yeah, could certainly do that. That's a really tough spot. So again, um, the 2 foot width is the kicker that makes it very, very difficult. But I would even though I wouldn't normally, I would probably explore something like berberis or consider that anyhow. I don't know. Oh, that's full sun. Yeah. Another thing you could do is so taxus. They are quite slow growing. They're probably going to be slower than thuya. I've used those quite a bit. There's various forms of taxes that may work well there for a number of years, and then may hit a point where they run out of root zone. So that's the one thing you'd have to be mindful of. Yeah. All right. So I guess that is the only question for lesson number 6 here. All right. We went over those last time. Cool. So I'm not sure. Let's see. We could do a few things here. I am gonna just fire up my design software. We'll have to wait on that, but we can look at a few projects that we're currently working on. If anybody wants to look at anything specifically, this is a good time to place that in the chat, and we can do so. Doesn't have to be um, relating to soil. Could be anything. So what I was going to do, if I don't hear from anybody, I will just load up a design that we're currently working on and show you where we are at. Maybe I'll stop share. Yeah, I'll just show you where we're at on one of these projects that you might enjoy. All right, so I'll make this a little bit smaller. This is the software we use, and I'm not going to get into that. But what we're seeing up here is a planting palette. So let me just walk you through a couple of things that we have done for this client. We started with this base plan, and we were able to get contour information. So these are actually 6-inch contours. The site here is so flat that we wanted to make sure that we were able to oh, okay, we've got another question here. I'll just finish up this one sheet here and go back to the questions. Yeah, so this is a base plan we put together, and we then did a sector map, which, this would look familiar to everybody. And then we put together a water layer. So this is how we kind of sequence our drawings, where we do a sector map, then we do our water layer, then we do a access layer, so patio, walkway, movement through the site, and then we actually do the soil layer last, right? So we can go through all that in greater detail, but let's answer a question here. Arela. Now, I have a hard time with your name, and I have no idea why, but I am getting close to the correct pronunciation. You want me to speak about weather conditions that are more ideal for doing a perk test with summer drought, winter dynamics. Yeah, that's a really good question. When we're certainly not there now. Where I live, we're getting pretty high winds and rain today. First huge rainfall we've had since, probably April or May. So we've had a long drought. So if we were doing a perk test here, and it was drought, what I would do is I'd fill the hole, let it drain out, and then I would refill it so that has some level of hydration to it. And then get a slightly more accurate reading. The winter where I am is fine. Like, we are so well drained here, it wouldn't really matter. But if you were in a low-lying area, that had a high water table, you may find that you know, conducting a percolation test in the winter is not doable. So that's how I would approach that. It would be really site specific. And if you can't do that, that's where the penetrometer comes in too, is just utilizing that instrument versus having to do a percolation test itself. So hopefully that helps you out. Yeah, no problem. Okay. Um, yeah, soils are a biggie. And what I might actually do here is show you. Yeah, I'll see if I can find something here for you. And it's one way we dealt with compaction on a larger site. Just seeing if I can find my video online here. Nope, didn't find it there. Sorry for the delay here. Just searching through my videos to see if I can. Aha, there we are. All right, I'll just switch over. So we had, let's see here. I better share screen again. Sorry about that. There we go. So this video was done quite a while ago on a project that that we did. I'm not sure why I'm in this. Oh, let me go back to, here we are. Okay, so this is a keyline plow, and I am going to just show you what that looks like. So this is what it looks like. It's very unique in that it can decompact soils while reducing or minimizing soil disturbance. So if, for instance, this pasture here, it was heavily compacted uh, through mismanagement or for whatever reason, it's really challenging to try and decompact it. But with this keyline plow, that does an amazing job. So on this particular project, this was almost old growth forest that our clients basically cut down. They left a few cedars, and then they called us, realizing they had some challenges. And they had, before we got there, they had a D9 cat that the property owner owned, and he flattened the whole property and buried stumps and things like that. So we brought this keyline plow in to decompact it and relieve the pressure. And just a short video showing what we did there, but it's very fast. And you could repeat this process annually for a couple of years if you needed to. You can also see here how there's a lot of woody debris getting pulled up, and that was all buried with bulldozer, etc. Not too many rocks, a few, but you know, there's some wood. So instead of properly disposing of that material, They just buried it. So, but this worked really well. When we got there with our penetrometer, we couldn't go into the soil more than about a half an inch without it sort of redlining at 300 psi on the compaction scale. So this was a game changer, completely relieved that compaction, and then air can now start exchanging with the soil itself. So one of the very interesting things that um, I've discovered through my time, and this was via, I believe I learned this with Dr. Elaine Ingham, was that if you look at your soil profile, that top 8 inches of your soil is going to have an air exchange once every hour. So you can imagine when you have a compacted soil situation, that is inhibited. So then you go from having aerated soils that have uh, aerated organisms like worms and microorganisms that we can't easily see. It shifts to anaerobic organisms so that these are traditionally organisms that aren't helpful for your landscape if they're dominant, and they can cause a lot of problems. So to break all that up again provides, it's like you being able to breathe versus being constricted, right? Your breathing being constricted. So it's quite an amazing transformation. Now, if you're on a small site, an urban site, we'll say, one of the best ways to break up compaction is with a broad fork. And this is exactly the type we have. Great for the Pacific Northwest, where we tend to have, where we live, it's kind of gravelly, rocky, sandy. You can run into some large rock. This is very, very durable. And again, it's very much like the keyline plow, where you can relieve compaction 14 inches down and yet have minimal soil disturbance. Let's see if we can see what somebody's doing here. So this is the idea. You push it in and you pull it back, and the surface of the soil is, left pretty much as is. A lot of people think when they have um, a compaction issue that they need to rototill. Now, there is a place for that. Um, but what happens when you are tilling, and you can imagine if you just even look at the world we live in, imagine if a large machine came into our world and decided to flip it upside down, right? So if that happened, most of us would die, a few of us would live and rebuild. So that's much what happens within the soils. Disturbance, especially turning over soil, like we do in traditional agriculture, is very hurtful for the soil organisms, and they are what drive the nutrient cycle, right? So compost does not drive the nutrient cycle. If you put compost on your soil without soil organisms to convert that into plant available nutrients, you'll have no response. So it is, tread lightly and be very careful what you do with your soils to enhance them as much as possible. So, um, all right, that's my little blurb on that. We have another question here from Christopher. You have a vine that's growing between fences. You remove it the best you can. It smells horrible. You cannot find any information about it and how to control it. Yeah, I don't know if you can put pictures on your porcelain berry. Well, let's look at what that is. I am not great with my common names, so yeah, I think I've seen this around. I don't know if it's really in my area too much, which it looks like it's an invasive in eastern US. So you are trying to get rid of an invasive. All right. So I gather your question, Christopher, is how to control it naturally. Yeah. Well, if you have an invasive and you're trying to get rid of it, here they get shaded out by younger trees, and that often will get rid of them. So that's good information to know. If you go along and if you're on an urban site and you can just go along and easily cut new emerging shoots, that's one way, that's an obvious way of getting rid of it. It even Himalayan blackberry, you can get rid of. It's just you have to be persistent and you want to try and have it avoid having it set fruit, right? Because as soon as that happens, you are going to be spreading that around probably on your project site or in somebody else's landscape. So it's a beautiful looking plant, but yeah, looks like it's an invasive that you want to try and keep away from. Often coexists with Virginia creeper, poison ivy, and sassafras. So yeah, that's very interesting. Yeah, I would just keep cutting it uh, as you are able and definitely prevent it from flowering. And you'll probably find that its vigor starts to diminish, and and if again, you can create some shade in that area, it sounds like that is a way to go. Now, one thing that's really interesting when we look at invasives is okay, go. So Dow Orion, who's one of the instructors with OSU here, she has this excellent book, and I would highly recommend people take a read of this. If you can find it in your library, that's great. If you can buy it, it's well worth it. She has incredible experience working with invasives and in natural restoration projects, and how there is been this war on invasives. So instead of actually looking at the whole reason they're occurring, we tend to see them emerge in the landscape and want to inflict harm on them, right? Because they're not what we want. And I see that on the property I live. We have some invasives here too. We have 5 acres, so it's pretty hard when you have some disturbance. And that's what is the key thing here. The only reason we're going to see invasives is because there's been disturbance in the soil. And these invasives are actually trying to help. Believe it or not, they are trying. Where I live, we get a lot of Scotch broom and Himalayan blackberry, and they tend to be, they're not super early succession plants, and we're going to get into soil succession a bit later in the course, but they follow pretty quick. And a great example on a small bit of pasture where I live, it used to be all pasture. We let we wanted it to return to forest again. And we had no need for the pasture. So we allowed it, we started to unmanage it. Okay. And so unmanage, I mean, we stopped cutting the pasture. And it was very interesting to see the results. We got some Himalayan blackberry. We've then had some red alder come up between the blackberry, and it's now we also have some Douglas fir and some conifers coming back. So it's part of the sequence. A lot of times these invasives are. So you almost need to have a big picture view of them and ensure that when you do disturb your landscape or a project site, that you have a plan in place to follow up with some other action. And what I mean by that is planning that space before you disturb it. The same goes for new planting areas. If you created a new planting area in a project site, uh, and you built a bed, let's say, and then you just stepped away and did nothing, it's going to create they'll have all sorts of surprises come up. Because really these early succession or mid succession plants are trying to heal the soil, and the soil, believe it or not, ultimately wants to be an old growth forest, especially where we live on the west coast here. I know Wilfred has chimed in some advice. Thank you very much for that. Wilfred's in Africa, so he's a very different climate, but the premise will be very similar. Disturbance is followed by early succession plants, and sometimes the invasives are all part of that. So it's really taking great care with your soil to avoid, in part, to avoid some of the invasives coming in, and then planning, of course. So if you disturb the ground, you want to follow it up, even if it's just with a cover crop, just to cover the soil, get something living in there again, and then build on that. So thank you, Wilfred, for that comment, and for Christopher, challenging to read. Yeah, yeah, I get it. It's a pretty deep subject, and it is very interesting. So again, I see invasives all over the place, and again, it's often um, not only disturbance, but a lack of management, a lack of follow-up. So if you have a forest in an area and you take that forest down to create pasture, and if you don't come in right after that preparation is done and get your uh, pasture establishment started, you're going to have unknowns emerge, and that's probably not what you're after. So whether they be annual weeds or what have you. And we a great example is where we live here. We did some we disturbed some areas last fall, and unfortunately, my wife and myself, both of our fathers passed away within 3 weeks of each other. It was really crazy. And it's just the way it is. But that took us off our game for a while, and we didn't follow up in those areas quickly enough before it was about mid-October is the deadline for seeding in our area, for seeding any grass or pasture or cover crop. And because of that, this spring, boom, we've got emergence of things that we really weren't wanting. So we have to go in and we have to prep again very soon. And yeah, so you're always learning, but sometimes life takes you in a different direction. Let's see here in the chat, we got another comment. Aurelia, maybe to Wilfred's question, how do you build soil in tropical climates? Yes, well, I think what you'd find is temperate soils, a lot of that life is within the soil itself. So if we look at the deep soils that we can typically get in North America climate, temperate climates, regardless of where you are in North America, except maybe the dry, hot areas, you're going to have deep soils, and a lot of that life is within the soil. And I think what you'll find in a tropical climate, because of the high levels of rainfall typically associated with some areas, a lot of that life is within the vegetation and that biomass that's breaking down on the soil itself. So it would be a very different, um, a somewhat different process, and a lot drier areas, for instance, and there's dry tropical areas for sure. I think Wilfred's area only gets, if I'm not mistaken, it's under 1,000 millimeters per year. So it's under, oh gosh, actually it's way less than that. Hey, Wilfred, if you can hear me, if you can recall your average annual rainfall. I'm trying to remember it myself. I have a feeling it's under a foot of rain per year, but I'm not sure. I might be mixing your site up with another one, but it is quite site specific. So say you're in Nevada, hot and dry, your soil building, you're going to be covering your soil a lot of the year and then trying to encourage growth with your cover crops and plant materials at other times, right? So again, very, very specific. Yeah, exactly. So you're right with that. A lot of that life is within the vegetation, and it runs out quickly you know, in a wet tropical environment. Mulch is very important for sure, regardless of where you are, and that can take on different, that could be almost anything. Certainly in the Pacific Northwest, here we've used straw, we've used hay, although I wouldn't necessarily recommend that because it has weed seeds. Um, Impermanent plantings. Oh, thank you, Wilfred. 680 mil. So that's around just over 2 feet of rainfall a year, which is not very much considering your proximity to the equator. So yeah, very, very different approach with working with soils there versus, say, the Pacific Northwest, where we're getting inundated. For instance, where I'm living today, we're getting probably 25 to 30 mils of rain, and that's the first big rain this season, and probably 80% of it's going to run off on most properties. We're holding it. We're we have a huge rain garden. We also are collecting off of our roof here, so we're pretty excited that it's raining again. Yeah, so I don't know if there is any other questions. We've kind of run around a little bit here, but trying to give everybody a good picture of this whole soil thing, and it's such a key component to successful landscapes. Um, just before we go, I will just show you a picture of what happens when things go right. I just got to find it. Sorry. There we go. And then we'll call her a day here. All right. So this landscape, believe it or not, that is just 1 year old. And the reason it's responded so quickly is A, we brought in some large tree and shrub material. but it's all about the soil, building soil. And how we do that in a new installation is typically we'll add 12 to 18 inches of topsoil, the best quality that we can get. And then we'll plant this, we'll irrigate, add soil. When I say irrigate, we'll place irrigation into the landscape. Then we add our soil, and then we plant. And then once we're finished planting, we will mulch with the highest quality compost we can get. And we'll apply between 1 and 2 inches of compost. And then boom, this is the sort of response you can expect. And, it looks like it's filled in. It's very happy and get more strength from the plants, so you get less diseases. I mean, I've never had any real health issues with. Usually, when you do bring in trees, like these were all planted, these ones here, these were just put in. Um, those are the items. This shrub here, it's probably 6 or 8 foot. Uh, this is where you get your challenges, is bringing in larger caliper trees, but you just have to follow it up with really good practices with mainly irrigation, supporting them through the growing season. So yeah, so that is about it for today's Q&A. If anybody has any other questions they want answered, now is definitely the time. I don't think there are any other questions in the document. I don't see. All right. Yeah, well, thank you everybody for well, all your hard work up to now. Really have been enjoying looking through everybody's assignments. One of the reasons I love doing what I do with OSU is getting to see everybody's work. It's just fabulous. And I hope you have a great week and really look forward to seeing your lesson number 6 assignment. And then we'll have another meeting in a couple weeks here. So everybody take care, and thank you again for being here today. Bye for now.